Padre Pio felt the presence long before he saw the vision forming. It arrived not with thunder or flashing light, but with a quiet shift in the air, a subtle trembling like the gentle stir before a storm of grace breaks open across the horizon of a soul. It was the kind of stillness that heaven uses when it wants to reveal something profound, and what heaven wanted to show him now was not grand or complicated. It was something simple, so ordinary that most people ignore it every single day, yet something that heaven saw as a shield, a weapon, a sign of belonging, and a declaration of faith all at once. The vision opened like a curtain being drawn aside. Padre Pio saw a person walking through daily life, a train station filled with hurried footsteps, a crowded market echoing with voices, a dim street at dusk where lights flickered weakly against the coming night. There was nothing extraordinary in the scene. No angels visible, no miracles, no dramatic signs. Just the ordinary world with its noise, its rush, its quiet loneliness. But Padre Pio's spiritual sight caught something immediately. A rosary tucked inside the person's pocket, barely visible to human eyes but shining with spiritual radiance. To the world, it was just a string of beads, something old, fragile, insignificant. But to heaven, it glowed like a burning ember, a mark of identity, a symbol of a soul tied to Mary, even if the soul had forgotten that connection moments ago. A soft light hovered around the rosary, subtle and steady, like an ember waiting to be breathed upon. It did not shine constantly. It did not burst with dramatic supernatural fire. It simply rested with a quiet authority that sent ripples through the unseen world. As the person walked, Padre Pio saw shadows trailing behind them, spiritual dangers that cling to every human life. Discouragement took the shape of a thick fog. Temptation glided like a whispering silhouette. Fear curled like cold wind around the ankles. Confusion hovered in shifting clouds. Loneliness pressed in like a weight on the chest. These shadows drifted close, drawn to the soul the way darkness moves toward any flicker of exhaustion or despair. But each time they neared the person, the rosary flickered, just a pulse of light, just a breath of grace. And the shadows recoiled, stumbling back as though something in that small, unnoticed object pushed them away without effort or confrontation. Padre Pio understood instantly. A soul that carries a rosary, even silently, is never unarmed. The person had not prayed it that day. They had not touched it since morning. Their mind was full of worries and plans, not devotion. Yet the rosary's presence alone shaped the spiritual landscape around them. Heaven recognized it as a sign of devotion, even when the heart was distracted. Because the rosary is more than an object, it is an invitation that remains open at all times. It is the memory of prayer, the longing for grace, the echo of a connection between the soul and Mary that never completely fades. The vision deepened, as if heaven wanted him to see more. Padre Pio noticed angels walking beside the person, not because the rosary magically summoned them, but because the rosary signaled something deeper, the soul's desire for God, however faint, however hidden beneath layers of tiredness and distraction. Heaven responds to desire more powerfully than to perfection. The angels were not constantly intervening. They did not swing swords or block attacks in dramatic fashion. They simply walked, watched, protected, and waited. The moment the soul turned its attention even slightly toward the beads, the angels stood ready as if heaven itself leaned in closer. Then the vision shifted. Another person appeared, this one overwhelmed by exhaustion. Their shoulders sagged with the weight of discouragement. Their mind seemed clouded by worry and fatigue. The rosary this person carried was wrapped loosely around their wrist, not out of devotion, but out of habit, almost like an accessory they forgot to remove. Padre Pio saw the darkness pressing against this soul more boldly. Negative thoughts swirled like smoke. Memories of old wounds rose with painful clarity. Temptations whispered with familiar voices trying to pull the heart into despair. Yet each time the person moved their hand, the rosary brushed against their skin and the darkness weakened. Not in a dramatic explosion of light, not instantly or visibly, but steadily, consistently, like a drip of grace that wears away the hardness of fear. Padre Pio understood the meaning immediately. Even unconsciously carrying a rosary invites a slow, constant resistance against spiritual corrosion. The beads were like anchors of heaven tied to the person's flesh. Each bead represented a prayer they might have prayed once in childhood, a devotion they hoped to return to someday, a memory of Mary's presence, even if they could not feel her now. The rosary was not a magical object, it was a doorway heaven never ignored. Then Padre Pio saw the rosary glow more brightly. The person had touched it accidentally, an absent-minded brush of the fingers, a small, unconscious gesture, nothing more. But that tiny contact released a wave of grace so tender, so subtle, yet so effective that the shadows around the soul shuddered and pulled back. Heaven used that single unplanned touch as a prayer. Padre Pio felt awe rise within him. God listens even when the soul does not know how to speak. Mary responds even when the heart is too tired to form words. The vision shifted again. A man walked along a quiet street heading home from work. He carried a rosary with deep reverence. The beads were worn smooth from years of prayer, soaked with tears, gratitude, and whispered petitions. Though he was not praying at that moment, only walking, only breathing, Padre Pio saw something extraordinary. When a spiritual threat approached, an unseen bitterness rising in his heart or a temptation forming silently in his thoughts, his guardian angel stepped forward instantly. The angel's sword gleamed, ready. It was almost as if the rosary itself gave permission for a more aggressive protection. Padre Pio felt this truth resonate deeply. When a soul is connected to Mary, even in silence, the angels guard that soul with fiercer devotion. Heaven protects those who cling to Mary with a tenderness that resembles a mother protecting her child. Next, the vision revealed a woman sitting alone in a dim room. Her heart was heavy with grief. She held her rosary not with confidence, but with desperation. Tears fell onto the beads like small drops of surrender. Her soul was questioning heaven, aching with silence, wondering why her prayers had not yet been answered. Padre Pio saw something beautiful unfold. As her tears touched the rosary, Mary's presence appeared, not in bodily form but as a soft maternal warmth that surrounded the woman like a blanket of compassion. The woman did not see Mary. She did not feel her. But heaven showed Padre Pio the truth. Mary stands beside any soul who holds a rosary in suffering. Even when the soul feels abandoned, heaven is closer than breath. Her grief did not vanish, but it stopped crushing her. Her heart remained wounded, but it did not break. Padre Pio sensed heaven adjusting the weight of her sorrow, just enough for her soul to survive one more day, one more night, one more prayer. Then the vision shifted again. This time, Padre Pio saw a person carrying a rosary purely as decoration. The beads were a fashion accessory. There was no faith in their heart, no prayer in their mind, no devotion in their soul. Yet what Padre Pio saw startled him. Even in this indifference, the rosary emitted a faint light, weak, unsteady, but undeniably present. Because the rosary carries Mary's imprint even when the person does not. The object itself remembers the prayers it was created for. Grace hovered around the soul like a patient invitation, waiting for the moment, maybe years later, when the hardened heart would crack open. Heaven plans for the long conversion of souls. Then a far more intense scene appeared. A soul was under interior attack. Anxiety rushed like cold wind through their thoughts. Fear gripped their chest. Intrusive memories stormed their mind. The darkness around them was aggressive, trying to overwhelm the soul from inside. The person reached instinctively into their pocket. Their fingers grazed the rosary. Instantly the darkness froze, not destroyed, not defeated, but stopped, held back as if by an invisible force. The guardians around the soul straightened. The spiritual atmosphere shifted. A soft but powerful brightness filled the air. Carrying a rosary gave the soul access to help it did not know how to ask for. Padre Pio watched as the person finally pulled the rosary out with shaking hands. They held it desperately, and heaven responded. Grace poured around them like a shield, not because the soul prayed perfectly, but because they reached for Mary in vulnerability. That reach alone became a prayer. The first half of the vision approached its climax. Padre Pio saw souls leaving their bodies, crossing into eternity. Those who carried a rosary, even if they had not prayed it often, were accompanied by an unexpected brightness. A comforting presence moved toward them. Mary recognized her children by the quiet devotion they carried in their pockets or around their necks or in their hands. The rosary they carried in life became a bridge in their first moments of eternity. And Padre Pio understood something profound. A rosary is not simply an object. It is a spiritual companion, a witness, a guardian, a memory of grace. It walks with the soul even when the soul forgets it is not alone. The vision paused as if heaven took a breath. Then, like dawn rising, the second half began. A brightness unfolded, not harsh, not overwhelming, but clean and living. Heaven wanted to show Padre Pio what happens the moment a soul decides not just to carry the rosary, but to pray with it. The beads that had been silent began to glow, ready to reveal the deeper mystery waiting within the heart of prayer. The brightness that opened before Padre Pio was unlike anything he had seen in the earlier scenes. It was not simply light, it was the living warmth of heaven made visible, like dawn stretching across a quiet landscape, awakening everything it touched. The rosary in the soul's hands, the same beads that once rested quietly in pockets, hung from wrists or lay forgotten in drawers, began to shimmer with a life that did not belong to stone or wood or metal. It was as if the prayers woven into it over centuries by millions of souls had risen like incense to meet this one person's trembling intention. The moment a soul lifted the beads, heaven leaned closer. Padre Pio felt it, like a great silence settling before a sacred moment.
The person's first attempt to pray was clumsy, unsteady. Their thoughts scattered, their lips barely moved. Their heart was unsure.
But heaven did not wait for perfection. It responded to the very first movement of the soul turning toward God, even before the first word of the Hail Mary formed. The angels around the person drew nearer. Shadows stepped back. The atmosphere thickened with grace. When the first bead slipped between the person's fingers, Padre Pio saw a river of light pour through the veil between earth and eternity. It was gentle, steady, unforced, but overflowing with power. The person whispered the words, struggling to focus, yet every syllable seemed to echo through realms unseen. Each Hail Mary stretched like a thread from the person's heart into heaven itself, stitching broken pieces of their soul together with invisible hands. Padre Pio saw memories being healed, not erased but soothed. He saw burdens loosening, grudges softening, fears calming, sins shrinking in the light of mercy. With each decade, the soul seemed to breathe deeper. The heaviness that clung to their shoulders lifted ever so slightly. Shadows tried to return, to regain their influence, but the rhythm of prayer pushed them farther and farther away. The rosary was not merely a weapon, it was music, and its melody reshaped the landscape of the soul. Padre Pio watched as a grace-filled wind began to circle the person, moving like a soft cloak of protection. It was the breath of Mary, the motherly nearness that entered the room without sound or movement, yet transformed everything she touched. As the prayer continued, Padre Pio saw something even more astonishing. Each Hail Mary became a rose unfolding in the spiritual realm. Some roses bloomed fully, radiant and fragrant, blossoming with the purity of sincere prayer. Others were small and weak, petals half opened because the soul was distracted or tired. But heaven accepted them all with equal tenderness. None were wasted. Even the imperfect prayers, especially the imperfect prayers, were gathered by Mary with maternal delight, as if she treasured every attempt, every effort, every small turning of the heart toward God. The person's soul began to shine with a clarity Padre Pio had never witnessed. The rosary in their hands pulsed with grace, and the angels sang without sound, a harmony heard only by heaven. The darkness around them retreated miles away, unable to withstand the consistency of prayer woven bead by bead. Padre Pio realized that praying the rosary was not simply speaking words, it was allowing heaven to breathe within the soul. Then the vision widened, showing countless souls across the world praying at the same moment. Some were kneeling before statues, some praying while walking, some praying in hospital beds, whispering through pain, some praying in cars on their way to work, others praying in secret because their faith had to be hidden. The the rosary wrapped them all into one living chain, stretching across continents, binding humanity to heaven in a way that even angels marveled at. Padre Pio saw Mary walking through these scenes like a mother checking on her children, touching their heads, wiping their tears, strengthening their hearts with every unseen step. Finally, the vision narrowed again to the single soul before him. When they finished the last Hail Mary and kissed the crucifix, a wave of peace settled over them so deep and so complete that even the air around them seemed to exhale. The person did not realize what had happened. They simply felt lighter, calmer, more anchored. But Padre Pio saw the full truth. He saw how heaven had moved, how angels had fought, how Mary had embraced, how grace had poured like a river through a trembling set of hands and a fragile human heart. And in that moment he understood something eternal. A soul that prays the rosary becomes a torch in the darkness, even when the soul feels like nothing more than a flickering flame. If Part 1 revealed how the rosary protects simply by being carried, Part 2 revealed what happens when the soul finally chooses to open the door completely. Padre Pio saw a single soul sitting at the edge of a bed late at night, weighed down by exhaustion, discouragement, and a loneliness they did not dare name. The room was dim, silent, and heavy with a kind of tiredness that sinks deeper than the body. The rosary lay untouched on the nightstand, like an invitation waiting patiently for the soul to breathe. Nothing moved. Each bead of the rosary glowed with a different kind of light, depending on the intention silently attached to it. When the soul prayed for strength, the bead glowed with warm gold, as if courage itself were lighting from within. When they prayed for forgiveness, a gentle silver shimmer appeared, soft as moonlight. When they prayed for someone they loved, a child, a parent, a friend, someone far away, the bead burned with a brightness that eclipsed everything else, like a star igniting in the darkness. The rosary did not simply hold the prayer, it magnified it. The angels surrounding the soul responded accordingly. Some knelt in reverence, others lifted their wings like shields, others moved outward, carrying the grace of the prayer toward the person being prayed for. Padre Pio was stunned by the beauty of it. He realized the rosary was not merely a devotion. It was a living river, a distribution system that transported grace from heaven to earth. The vision shifted to another soul, one who carried a rosary but rarely prayed it. Their life was chaotic, full of noise, stress, and inner confusion. Padre Pio watched this person rummaging through their bag, searching for something entirely unrelated, when suddenly their fingers brushed the rosary. A memory faint as a whisper flickered in their heart. A tiny stirring of prayer rose up from a place they had long neglected. They hesitated, and in that hesitation heaven leaned closer. The person finally pulled out the rosary, not with devotion, not with discipline, but with the raw desperation of someone drowning and suddenly finding a rope. Padre Pio saw Mary's presence appear instantly, surrounding the soul with the warmth of a mother who sits beside a child who forgot they were loved. The person began praying awkwardly, mixing up the words, skipping entire sections, stumbling through the mysteries without rhythm or understanding. None of it mattered. They were praying from a breaking heart, and heaven always carries what the soul cannot. Padre Pio saw Mary gently filling the gaps in the person's prayer with her own tenderness, lifting the broken pieces, completing the unfinished words, shaping the scattered intentions into something whole. The soul prayed 5 Hail Marys, not 50. But those 5 shook the darkness loose from their life more effectively than weeks of silent suffering ever had. Grace rushed in where despair had settled. Then heaven revealed something deeper still. Padre Pio saw a person going through an ordinary day, carrying a rosary without praying it. They walked through crowded streets, cooked dinner, faced stress, conflict, distractions, and fatigue. The beads stayed in their pocket, unnoticed. But the guardian angel walking beside them moved differently, more alert, more responsive, more shielded. When the person faced sudden anger from another, the rosary glowed faintly. When they faced temptation, the beads pulsed with a quiet warning. When fear crept into their mind late at night, the The rosary shimmered like a small, vigilant flame. Padre Pio understood something profound. When a soul carries a rosary, the forces of darkness recognize it, even if the person forgets it is there. Hell sees Mary's symbol long before the soul remembers to call on her. The next vision became harsher and more urgent. Padre Pio saw a soul overwhelmed by temptation and fear, suffocated by shadows pressing inward. The person's thoughts spiraled downward. Their heart felt crushed, their will weakened. Darkness hovered close, whispering lies and hopelessness. The soul looked helpless until they reached instinctively for their pocket. The moment their fingers wrapped around the rosary, the darkness shattered. A violent backlash rippled across the spiritual realm. Demons recoiled as though struck by a force they could not withstand. Some fled instantly, others tried to regain ground, but were pushed back relentlessly. The guardian angel surged forward, empowered by the soul's smallest gesture of trust. Padre Pio saw a spiritual law written across the moment. A soul touching a rosary activates a protection it cannot yet comprehend. Then he saw a child carrying a rosary, tiny fingers curled around oversized beads. The child wasn't praying, they simply liked the feel of it. But Mary appeared behind the child with a luminous presence so tender that Padre Pio felt his own heart soften. Darkness didn't even dare approach, because innocence carrying a rosary is one of the most powerful forces in heaven. Then he saw another child praying beside a parent. The child didn't understand the mysteries, didn't fully grasp the words, but heaven did. Angels descended around them, surrounding not only the child, but the entire household. A single child's prayer shielded an entire family. The vision then grew solemn and gentle. Padre Pio saw a soul lying at the brink of death, unconscious and unable to form words. The rosary rested on their chest. He saw Mary draw near, not in dramatic apparition, but like a mother leaning over a sleeping child. A single Hail Mary, prayed earlier in the person's life, returned in that moment, carrying grace into the final breath, where the soul could no longer pray. Heaven applied that prayer like a final blessing, a spiritual anointing guiding the soul into eternity. Padre Pio trembled at the beauty of it. A rosary carried in life becomes a torch in the hour of death. The vision shifted again, showing the soul's first steps into eternity. The rosary no longer appeared as beads, but as a mark glowing on the soul itself, a mark that silently declared, "This soul called upon Mary. This soul belongs to her." Mary approached these souls more quickly, not because they were better, but because mothers run toward children who once whispered their name. A rosary held in life became a bond fulfilled in eternity. Then Padre Pio saw one final, overwhelming truth. He saw a soul who had lived without prayer, without devotion, without any conscious love for God. But they carried a rosary, given long ago by a grandmother, a friend, a stranger, or placed in their hand at a moment of grace they barely remembered. They never prayed it. They barely acknowledged it. Yet the rosary stayed with them like a seed buried in dry, forgotten soil. And in the darkest hour of their life, when despair reached its peak and all hope seemed lost, their hand trembled toward it, one time, one gesture, one desperate reach. Heaven exploded with response. Mary rushed toward the soul with such speed and urgency that even Padre Pio felt breathless. Angels surrounded the person instantly. Grace flooded in like a storm of light. The soul was lifted, rescued, and embraced. Not because it was holy, not because it was prepared, but because it reached for the one thread of heaven it had never fully understood. Padre Pio felt heaven's message burn deeply into his heart. No soul who carries a rosary is ever beyond the reach of mercy. The vision faded. Padre Pio remained breathless, overwhelmed, trembling with the weight and wonder of everything he had seen. His heart felt both heavy and light, heavy with the knowledge of how real and intense the spiritual battle is, yet light with the understanding of how easily heaven responds to even the smallest opening of the human heart. Earth sees rosaries as simple objects. Heaven sees them as lifelines, anchors, shields, and promises. A soul who carries a rosary carries a bridge to grace, A soul who prays it opens heaven itself. And after witnessing it all, Padre Pio knew he would never again look at a rosary as a mere string of beads. He knew it was a companion, a guardian, a weapon of light, and a mother's hand reaching forever toward her children. Padre Pio felt the weight of the final vision settle deep inside him, not as fear, but as a quiet, trembling reverence. The scenes he witnessed still glowed before him like embers refusing to fade. He understood now that heaven hides its greatest mysteries inside the smallest gestures. A soul lifting a rosary was not a simple act. It was a signal, a cry, a reaching upward that echoed across eternity. And in every vision, in every moment of weakness, hesitation, confusion, or desperation, heaven had only one response: to draw nearer. The visions blended together in Padre Pio's mind until they formed one undeniable truth. No soul who reaches for a rosary reaches alone. Even the souls who barely believed, barely prayed, barely hoped, he saw how heaven surrounded them the moment their fingers touched the beads. Sometimes grace did not feel like light. Sometimes it felt like endurance, the strength to get through a night of fear, the softening of a heart ready to give up, or the gentle turn. It was a lifeline, a companion, a silent promise that heaven was always closer than any soul realized.